The Baltic island of Fehmarn is a popular tourist destination for many Germans. There's lots to do here. In the summer of 2011, Beate Zschäpe was one of the tourists who came to Fehmarn. No one here knew that for the past 13 years, Zschäpe had been leading a double life, with suspected killers Uwe Bernhardt and Uwe Mundlos. At the time this photo was taken, police say the two men had already killed 10 people. Zschäpe seemed to be enjoying her stay on the island in a camper van. These pictures were taken quite by coincidence for a travel film. Everyone there could see the camera team at work. If anyone didn't want to be filmed, they could have left the area. But Zschäpe stayed. What role did this vacation trip play in Zschäpe's double life? And how did these three right-wing extremists manage to stay off the authorities' radar for so long? Heike was a neighbor of Zschäpe's in Zwickau and a close friend. This is the first time she's spoken to the media about Zschäpe, whom she knew as Lisa Dienelt. Heike knew nothing of Zschäpe's double life.
This is where Lisa lived.
Zschäpe, Bernhardt and Mundlos lived here until 2008. Then they moved to another part of town. Even after the move, Zschäpe occasionally stopped by to visit Heike.
We used to have parties here in the summer. We'd put out tables and benches and just enjoy ourselves. And Lisa was always there. Sometimes we'd stay out till it got really late. But Lisa usually left early. And the rest of us would just stay and have fun.
This is one of the last photos taken of Beate Zschäpe in May 2011. Sometimes she'd come over to visit Heike several times a week. Zschäpe was friends with her for 5 years.
She was almost like a sister to me, an older sister. It's like she was part of the family. Every time I'd see her, it was like a family reunion. There was nothing unusual about it. She wasn't just a friend or an acquaintance. It was more than that.
Heike and Lisa spent a lot of time in this kitchen, chatting, smoking, and drinking. But Lisa never gave Heike her mobile phone number, and she simply stopped by for visits without calling in advance.
She'd show up at the worst possible times when you really didn't want visitors, but she'd be in a great mood and then you'd forget that you were upset.
You'd open the door and see Lisa, and everything was fine.
Heike and Nadine can't imagine their friend taking part in any murders. The news reports haven't changed their opinion of her.
I could talk to her about anything and confide in her. She'd never tell anyone else what we talked about. I don't care about all that stuff the police say. She's still the Lisa I knew back then. I don't care what her real name is, Beate or Lisa. She had a good heart, and that's what I'll remember.
Beate Zschäpe's double life first came to the authorities' attention in November 2011, after Bernhardt and Mundlos robbed a bank and tried to escape in a motorhome. As police approached the vehicle, the suspects, who were still inside, set it on fire. Shortly after that, Mundlos shot and killed Bernhardt and then himself. After Zschäpe found out what had happened to her colleagues, she set fire to the house where the three of them had been living, possibly to destroy evidence. 4 days later, she turned herself into the police. The authorities took these pictures of Zschäpe and later showed them to people who'd witnessed the string of murders. Police determined that over time, Zschäpe, Mundlos, and Bernhardt had rented more than 60 vehicles under assumed names. June 2004. This security camera video shows Uwe Bernhardt with a bicycle. Attached to that bicycle was a nail bomb. Police say Bernhard took the device to the heart of Cologne's Turkish community, Koipstrasse. As the suspects prepared their attack, Attila Özer was at a barber shop. He was looking forward to enjoying the upcoming weekend. He'd been invited to attend a wedding. Police say Bernhard's accomplice, Uwe Mundlos, brought 2 bicycles to the scene to be used in their escape. The suspects' activities as they prepared the bombing were also captured on security cameras.
Sometimes I have nightmares about it, and I wake up right away. Or when I hear an explosion somewhere, it reminds me of what happened there. All those people who were running around screaming. It was sheer panic. It all comes back to me. And now we know who did it because we've seen their pictures.
The nail bomb that had been attached to the bicycle blew up outside the barbershop in an area that was crowded with shoppers. 22 people were wounded, 4 of them seriously. The blast shattered windows up to 250 meters away. The nails that had been packed into the bomb tore into bystanders like shrapnel. Police suspected that terrorists might have been behind the attack, but Germany's interior minister at the time, Otto Schily, disagreed.
The evidence compiled so far indicates that this crime was not committed by terrorists but by common criminals.
At the time Schily made that comment, detectives were still gathering evidence at the scene. By that evening, police were wiretapping local residents. They also interviewed the victims, including Attila Özer. During the interview, Özer refused to take off his jacket because he was cold.
The people who did this wanted you to suffer. They wanted to wound people so that they'd suffer for the rest of their lives and remember what had happened to them. See what I mean? It stays with you. And every time someone asks me about it, I think about those people and what they wanted to do to us.
Bernhard, Mundlos, and Zschäpe kept a file of newspaper clippings about the bombings and other crimes they're accused of committing at their hideaway. Everything was meticulously sorted according to date and location. Police later discovered Zschäpe's fingerprints on a newspaper clipping about the Cologne bombing. Federal prosecutors have charged Zschäpe with being an accessory to murder and attempted murder, as well as arson and belonging to a terrorist organization.
She was great around kids, and that includes the ones who lived on our street. When the kids saw her coming, they'd run over to see her.
She'd take some of the older kids along with her when she'd buy a newspaper, or she'd bring chocolate candy with her. There was absolutely nothing suspicious. She was just a lot of fun. And the kids were always happy when Lisa came to visit.
The same woman who brought candy to children stands accused of taking part in the murders of 10 people, some of whom had children of their own. Enver Şimşek, the first of the murder victims, was shot and killed in September 2000. His daughter Semya was 14 at the time. His son Karim was 13.
That's the day I grew up. Before it happened, I was still a child. I used to play and have fun, and then all of a sudden, all that was over.
Enver Şimşek was gunned down by his assailants as he worked at his outdoor flower stall.
He was in a coma for 2 days, 9 bullets in him, 2 in the head. One of the shots hit him right in the eye, and it looked really bad. I'll never forget the sight of him lying there, 2 days in a coma. I think he was just trying to hold on for as long as he could. He just didn't want to die.
Kerim's father died on September 11th.
I drive through that part of town several times a week. And when I do, I immediately think about that series of murders. I often stopped at that flower stall to buy something. It's right in my neighborhood. When you see that place, it's like looking into the darkest corner of our society.
The murder of Enver Şimşek was also one of the darkest moments in Günter Bechstein's career.
We wanted our state to be the safest in the country. We wanted to have a 100% clearance rate for major crimes. And then came this series of murders. We put a lot of effort into the investigation, but we still couldn't crack the case.
5 of the killings took place in the state of Bavaria while Bechstein was still interior minister there. State investigators failed to find a common thread that would link the crimes. The killers left no evidence behind, except the bullets in the bodies of their victims. In each case, the murder weapon was a Czeska 83.
9 people were shot and killed with the same weapon. The authorities put everything they had into the investigation and still couldn't solve the case.
But those investigations were carried out by police teams in 5 different states. They didn't work together or share evidence and other information about the crimes. Bechstein was opposed to creating a joint federal task force to investigate the murders. He continued to rely exclusively on his own state investigators. In 2006, he offered a substantial reward for information leading to the arrest of the killers.
The police have once again increased the size of the reward to 300,000 euros. That's the sort of reward that they put out only when they're searching for terrorists.
The Federal Office for the Protection of the Constitution is in charge of domestic terrorism investigations. But as the search for the killers continued, the office said that it saw no indication of a new surge in right-wing terrorism. At the time, the office was focused on investigating cases of Islamist terrorism. Mundlos, Bernhard, and Schäpe lived for years in the southeastern city of Zwickau in the district of Marienthal. The rents here are low. 1 building in 4 stands empty. Why did the right-wing trio choose this particular location? They carried out 9 of the 10 murders while they were living here.
Polenzstraße was the worst part of Zwickau, even before Beate moved there. I've no idea why she did. And now we find out terrorists were living there.
People who live in this district don't pay much attention to what's going on outside their neighborhood.
These murders were known as the kebab murders. Did you hear anything about them?
No, I didn't. I don't watch the news on TV or crap like that.
No, not really.
People who live in this district have enough to worry about.
When the news comes on, I always change the channel. Maybe they'll run a weather forecast, that's okay. But I don't watch the news.
Schäpe's former neighbors are single mothers and they live on welfare. They were happy to have made a new friend.
She didn't talk much about herself, but she wanted to learn more about us. She wanted to know whether we're doing okay, whether we had any serious problems.
And did either of you try to get her to talk more about herself?
I didn't, but I can't speak for the others.
We go shopping or cook some noodles or drink a couple of bottles of wine or have a meal together. I just didn't think about asking her any questions.
And if someone did start asking uncomfortable questions, Zschäpe knew how to change the subject right away.
One of our friends asked her a simple question about her parents, and she didn't react at all. Right away, she started talking to one of the kids who was next to her. So that was that. The topic came up again a little later, and she said, "I can't talk about that." She started talking to the kid again, and the discussion ended right there.
Mundlos, Bernhard and Zschäpe felt comfortable living in a place where the neighbors didn't ask a lot of questions. Zschäpe did her best to give the impression that they were just normal folks. Normal folks, however, would likely not have outfitted their home with an alarm system. In the burned-out ruins of the house, police later found a total of 20 weapons, 3 of them loaded. Zschäpe had apparently acquired one of the weapons herself. Police also found 1,600 rounds of ammunition and 2.5 kilos of explosives. Meanwhile, police investigators were no closer to solving the series of murders.
I remember asking the police commissioner whether he needed another 100 people. With a team of that size, they could round up the suspects in a month. But he said that even if they had all those extra people, they'd simply run out of leads.
Mundlos, Bernhard and Zschäpe had compiled a list of 10,000 possible targets, including politicians, journalists, and facilities that house asylum seekers. They scouted their targets thoroughly and planned getaway routes, and they took their time. Sometimes years went by without an attack.
We ended up reducing the size of the investigation unit. But we kept the structure in place, so that if there was another murder, we could be up and running again in a very short period of time. We had a huge investigation unit on standby, waiting for the next murder. It was difficult for me as the chief law enforcement officer in our state to simply sit and wait.
Police say the actual murders were carried out by Bernhard and Mundlos, while Zschäpe kept an eye on things at home. The neighbors later said the 2 men stayed pretty much out of sight.
They'd spend the entire day on the computer. They said they were just playing computer games. She told us that one of the guys worked for his dad's computer repair shop and the other one helped out. She said that they could do their work at home, and so they didn't leave the house much.
We didn't see him very often. We didn't see them hanging around outside or standing around chatting with people. Sometimes they'd come out and get on their bikes. They'd say hello very quietly. It seemed perfectly normal. And then they'd ride off.
In 2006, the authorities say that Bernhard and Mundlos drove to Munich to carry out another attack. Their target was Theodoros Bulgaridis, a Greek immigrant who just opened a locksmith shop. He had worked as a ticket inspector for the National Railroad, but always dreamed of going into business for himself. Bulgaridis' brother still prays for him. So does the victim's widow. Weeks after the murder, Bulgaridis' body was returned to Greece for burial. Police accompanied his brother to the scene of the killing.
You could still see the blood on the floor where he'd fallen. Later, I scraped it all away. There was a lot of blood, a pool about 1.5 meters long. We took what I'd scraped away and scattered it under the tree in front of our house. When my wife and I go out for a walk, we like to stop there.
Και επί της γης των άρτων ημών των επιούσεων δώσεν ημίν σήμερον και άφησε ημίν τα οφειλήματα ημών ως και εμείς αφήνομεν.
At first, police believed that Bulgaridas was killed by someone who knew him well. His brother Gavril felt he was being treated like a suspect.
It's as if I was suddenly the criminal. It's the way they treated us, as if we were the suspects.
10 months later, the next murder was committed in Dortmund. Witnesses said the gunmen rode away on bicycles. Under police questioning, they described the shooters as junkies or Nazi types. Mehmet Kubasik was the 8th victim. He was a German and proud of it. Investigators believed he was involved in the local drug trade, and that led to his murder. But Kubasik owned and operated a thriving magazine shop. Grieving relatives were interrogated, their apartments searched, their telephone and bank records reviewed. Kubasik's daughter was 20 years old at the time. In remembrance, she had her father's name tattooed onto her arm.
Think about it. Your father is suddenly gone. From one day to the next. The pain and anguish. And a day later you're taken to the police station to undergo interrogation for 6 to 8 hours. When I think back on it, I don't know how I survived.
Semya Shimshek was 14 at the time of her father's death and was also subjected to harsh interrogation. Her father had entered Germany as a guest worker and eventually built up a thriving flour wholesale business. Again, investigators suspected he was a drug dealer. They made up stories in hope of getting the family to talk.
I'm disgusted at how they handled my mother. For a long, long time, they treated her as if she were a criminal suspect. They told her that my father had another family in order to break the bond she had with him.
Investigators even showed his wife pictures of the alleged second wife.
They asked my mother if she knew the woman. She told them no, she didn't. It was a picture of a blonde woman. They said my father had 2 children with her and that she lived in Nuremberg.
But it was all a lie, a bluff, completely fabricated by police detectives. The relatives of the victims had their own opinions about the killings and who might be to blame.
Finally, they asked me what I thought, because I hadn't reacted. I told them that, in my opinion, a crazed Nazi is running around the country killing people.
And that was the first thing that went through my mind. I said, okay, these crimes are motivated by a right-wing radical mindset. It's the only reason I can think of.
Gamze Kubasik told an investigator about her hunch. It fell on deaf ears.
He told me they had no proof. There was nothing to go on. I turned to him and said, so you have no proof of that, but every time you interrogate me, you ask whether my father was a drug addict or had ties with the mafia. I always thought the police wanted to help me, or at least believed what I told them. Now, looking back, I don't think that was the case at all.
But Interior Minister Günther Beckstein came to the same conclusion early on in the investigation. This handwritten note is clearly legible on the margin of a newspaper article on one of the murders. He asks investigators whether there are indications of anti-foreigner motivations. The answer was a firm no.
There was simply no evidence, so there was no reason to believe that the killers were trying to highlight a cause. Terror exists because groups hope to make their case through violence. They didn't choose that option, and that's probably the reason investigators didn't link the killings to a right-wing extremist terrorist group, or dismissed the possibility.
rechtsextremistischen Terrorgruppe gesucht oder für möglich gehalten hat.
9 of the victims were immigrants. That alone sends a message. And all of those were killed at their workplaces. That too sends a message. The families had no connection whatsoever. Again, that sends a message.
The terrorist trio had tried to find a way to finance their murderous designs. Mundlos and Bernhardt carried out 15 armed robberies. They threatened bank employees and turned to violence when necessary. During one holdup, they shot a young intern who tried to intervene. He survived. The crime spree netted some 600,000 euros. In each case, their getaway vehicles were bicycles that took them to a mobile hideout. Beata Zschäpe was the accountant. Witnesses say she took care of the bills and held the purse strings on vacation as well. The group always paid cash. The Baltic island of Fehmarn was their favorite getaway. A camping place with their RUV cost 800 euros per week. They spent as much as 5 weeks at a time here. Mundlos was a windsurfer. Bernhardt organized sailing excursions for the children at the campsite. Evenings were spent barbecuing with other vacationers. They even used the stolen cash to book a private plane for a bird's-eye view of the island. Fugitives on vacation. In the meantime, the victims' families were reduced to reliance on government aid. Their fathers and husbands had been successful businessmen, contributors to the economy. No more.
That's the way it is in Turkish families. My father was the breadwinner, and suddenly he was gone. We were still children and completely dependent. It was really a tough time.
For the first time in my life, I learnt what it was like to be unemployed and dependent on government help. We'd never needed it before.
But worse was to come. The victims were ridiculed in the boulevard press. This 2006 headline screams, "The Kebab Killers."
So many people dead, and the headline reads, "Kebab Killer." I have no idea. Was my father nothing more than a doner kebab? Wasn't he a human being? What does that mean? It seems to me that we are of no value to the people who wrote that.
And the media gravitates towards sensational stories. Here are some excerpts. The wildest rumors are spreading throughout the neighborhood, stories of revenge murders, gang wars, and protection money racketeers. There's speculation that a large organized crime gang is at work. Investigators have not ruled out the possibility. This has hallmarks of organized crime, a secretive operation. Still, all this is based on speculation, assumptions, so to speak. Those were just a few of the stories surrounding the death of Gamze's father. Soon, even the neighbors were believing the speculation.
That was a horrible period. I didn't want to go outdoors and have to confront all the rumors. Everyone was talking trash. They'd turn things around and say, "There must be something to all this. He was certainly guilty of something. The mafia was involved, or he was a drug dealer, or he was a drug addict." They believed all the negative press.
I'm a regular at a couple of bars and taverns, meeting places for friends. But on several occasions, I would enter, and all of a sudden 5 or 6 people nearby would get up and leave. They didn't want anything to do with me.
Gavril Voulgaridis was a respected member of the community. He had a well-paid job and his family lived in a large flat, until his brother was murdered. Slowly, even his best friends distanced themselves from him.
I got along with everyone. I'd say I have a good reputation. I see eye to eye with most people. The worst thing was that my closest friends were always questioning me. We put up with it for a few years, and then finally I moved back to Greece with my family. That was tragic. We were cut off from people who used to be our friends.
4 years after Gavril's brother was murdered, his family left Germany. They'd lived here for 35 years. The ninth murder prompted 2 demonstrations. Both were organized by ethnic Turkish organizations and relatives of the victims. For the first time, the issue was brought up in Germany's parliament, the Bundestag. Members of the Left Party demanded that the governing Grand Coalition release an account of the investigation. Turkish immigrant Haki Keskin showed a drawer full of threatening letters.
Verdammte Türken.
Damn Turks, dirty, disgusting people, stay away. Leave, go home, no citizenship for the stinking Turks. Those are just a few examples of many letters we've received over the years. And we're still getting them.
Keskin demanded that the government release all pertinent information about the killer's motivations and whether federal agencies were prepared to provide protection for Turkish businesses.
We're talking about 9 murders, 9 innocent human beings killed in cold blood. And we had no idea who was behind it or what their motives were. We demanded answers.
The government replied that it had no responsibility in the matter and refused to make a statement. Its official line was that it had no information on the matter.
They weren't taking the matter seriously. Worse, it was a laughing matter that a simple parliamentarian had the nerve to pose such questions. They thought a few platitudes would put it to rest.
Mit dieser banalen Antwort ad acta legen.
But the victims' families were feeling increasingly marginalized.
We integrated as best we could. We spent 40 years here, felt more German than Greek. We were beyond reproach. We had integrated fully into German society years before, and we felt at home here. There can't be anything wrong with that.
We were born here and we belong to Germany, but Germans won't accept that the children of immigrants born here are part of their society. They don't accept that, and they don't accept us.
Meanwhile, the terrorist trio was stylizing its own form of confession, a video in which they cruelly ridicule and scoff at their victims. The killers kept photographs of their targets. One was still alive at the time. After the deaths of her two compatriots, Beate Zschäpe released this propaganda DVD. She sent 15 copies to organizations, newspapers, and political parties. Now she's behind bars awaiting trial and remains silent.
I wanted to visit her, but my request was denied. I just wanted to look her in the eyes and get a feel for what kind of person she is. I'm curious to know what she'd say to me.
I'd just like to see the expression on her face. I hope she shows some kind of remorse. Not that she's so brainwashed by this ideology that she thinks she performed a righteous deed.
In Zwickau, the neighbors are aware that their one-time friend is charged with murder. They used to party together. She was one of the crowd. Now they find it difficult to comprehend the outrage.
Herrgott, Alter!
My God, 10 murders and one of them was a police officer. We've heard it all before and it doesn't mean a thing to me. The people should just shut the hell up. It's a personal matter. I knew this woman for years and it hurts. Maybe she wasn't even personally involved in the crimes.
Vielleicht war sie einfach nur so dabei.
They simply can't seem to accept the fact that their friend was a terrorist, though they do express a certain amount of understanding for why foreigners were killed.
Could you imagine something like this happening in Germany?
In Germany, sure. Lots of people don't care too much for foreigners. That's putting it mildly. But of course we never would have guessed that a friend of ours would do something like that.
They're well aware of the crimes their friend Beate Zschäpe stands accused of. Still, they differentiate between good right-wing extremists and bad right-wing extremists.
Du musst mal schlucken.
You can't just throw them all together. It's popular to demonize the evil right-wingers. And sure, there are some that take things too far. They'll never achieve anything that way. But there are also groups that are trying to achieve their goals peacefully.
There are the calm, peace-loving groups.
What do you mean?
Right-wing extremists. They listen to music and agree with the political views, but they'd never pick up a gun and kill someone.
Others take it a step further.
Ich bin jetzt keiner, der Adolf Hitler verehrt.
I don't idolize Adolf Hitler or Rudolf Hess. And I've got nothing against foreigners who come here to find a better life, who rise up from nothing, who work until they're exhausted and then work some more. Yeah, more power to them. But those who hang out in asylum centres and then get on the dole and they get everything handed to them on a plate. To be honest, I hate them.
Some members of this group are on welfare too, but they're German. The victims' families are finally being heard. This is their third official visit to Berlin, this time to meet with President Joachim Gauck. It's an effort to make up for past disregard, and the families will receive government compensation.
Finde ich absolut asozial.
It's absolutely antisocial in my mind. There are lots of people who have been through worse. For example, what about women and children who have been raped? They don't get any compensation, do they?
Now they'll get everything they need. But none of us has received compensation. No one has spoken with us about the situation. We have to deal with it on our own. But we were also personally involved, and it affected us too.
This group doesn't have much sympathy for those whose loved ones were brutally murdered. Gavril Voulgaridis has returned to Munich with his family. They're starting from scratch. He and his wife have jobs with the Bavarian state government. She's a cleaning lady and he's a garbage collector. They're grateful for their second chance. They missed Germany, the country they consider home.
I went to German schools, a German kindergarten. My friends are German, and this was always our home. It still is. Through all that has happened, I'm more convinced than ever that this is the case. I feel at home here.
This is my home. I'm adamant about that, and I refuse to leave, so they can forget about it. My roots are deep here, so I don't care what they think. Germany is my home. End of story. All of those who feel I'm not welcome here can just forget about it. We were born here, grew up here, and we won't turn our backs on Germany. Certainly not because of a group of sick people with sick ideas.